Chapter 1. The First Chilean Navy Encounter. The sea near Antarctica has a way of swallowing sound. Even the engines of a Navy vessel feel muted here, as though the ocean itself has decided to keep the noise for later. It was the year 1945, a time when the rest of the world was trying to heal its scars. But down here there was no rebuilding, no noise of cities, only the endless sweep of black water and drifting ice. The Chilean Navy crew on that voyage were seasoned men. They knew the southern winds. They knew the groan of shifting ice. They knew the silence that comes before a storm. But what they saw that night was nothing they had words for. Picture it. The sky so clear that the stars looked sharp enough to cut. The kind of stars that make you feel small and uninvited. The deck beneath your boots is rimed with frost. The ropes stiff. The railings slick and cold enough to burn your hands through the gloves. Your breath rises in white curls that disappear as quickly as they form. Every man keeps his collar turned up, his scarf pulled high, his ears tuned for the crunch of ice ahead. Then someone points. At first it is only a faint glow above the horizon, where no glow should be. Not a flare, not a star. It does not blink or flicker like a plane, and there were no planes here. It hangs there like a thought you are trying to catch, a pale disk against the deep sky. The lookout calls down to the deck. More men gather, each one shielding his eyes, staring. It is small at first, no bigger than a coin if you held it at arm's length, but as the ship moves and the clouds shift, it becomes clearer. The glow is not steady, it moves, not with the wind against it. Smooth, deliberate. One sailor swears under his breath. Another laughs, not because it is funny, but because something in him refuses to accept what his eyes are showing him. They have seen strange lights before, reflections on ice, tricks of the atmosphere, but this feels different, too precise, too silent. The officer of the watch steps out, boots thudding on the deck. His face is pale in the cold, his cap pulled low. He lifts the binoculars. For a long moment, he does not speak, and then the thing moves. It slides sideways, cutting across the sky with a grace no known aircraft could match. It stops so abruptly the men flinch. The sea below seems to hush. Even the gulls, restless shadows above the ice, fall quiet. You might imagine the sound of engines, the rush of air, the throb of power. There is none, only the low murmur of the sea and the quickening of your own pulse. The captain is woken. He steps out onto the bridge, coat half buttoned, eyes sharp despite the hour. He does not shout. He does not call for guns. He watches. The men wait for orders, but none come. Because what do you command when you do not understand what stands before you? For a few tense minutes, the disk drifts closer, close enough that its pale reflection touches the sea, laying a trembling silver ribbon across the black water. The ice catches it, and for an instant the whole world seems lit from nowhere, a soft, eerie glow that has no source except the thing itself. One sailor grips the railing so hard the frost cracks beneath his fingers. Another makes the sign of the cross. Someone mutters about ghosts. Someone else whispers about machines that belong to no nation. And then it rises. No roar, no flare of heat. It darts upward, faster than anything with wings, and in the space of a heartbeat it is gone. The sky is empty. Only the stars remain, still cold, still sharp, still indifferent. The logbook, when it is written, is dry. It says only that a light was observed. It moved with irregular speed. No sound detected. Weather clear. Position noted. It does not say that the deck went silent, that the men stood frozen with their breath steaming in the night. It does not say that the captain stood there long after the rest had gone below, staring at the empty sky, as if waiting for it to change back into something he understood. In the mess, later, theories bloom like frost. A trick of light, an aircraft no one wants to name. Some whisper of secret German experiments, remnants of the war creeping into the cold south. A few are quieter, their eyes drifting toward the ice outside the portholes, as if something older than any war had just passed them by. If you had been there, you would have felt it too, Not just the chill of the Antarctic wind on your face, not just the creak of the ship, but the sense that something had been watching, not threatening, not curious, simply present and then gone. The ship sailed on, the sea closed behind it, the sky held its silence, but the story did not leave them, not that night, not for years. Chapter 2. The Arturo Prat Base Incident, 1948. Antarctica has a way of making even the bravest men feel small. It is not just the cold, though the cold here is a living thing, wrapping its fingers around every joint and seam. It is not only the endless white, though that too presses on the mind until every horizon looks like the next. It is the weight of the silence, a silence so deep you start to imagine it has ears. At Arturo Prat Base, in the year 1948, that silence was their daily companion. The base sat hunched on a stretch of rock and ice, surrounded by water that was never fully free, never fully frozen. It was a lonely post, more a mark of presence than a place meant for comfort. The walls rattled when the wind came hard. The radio crackled with voices that always sounded far away, and the men passed their days with a mixture of routine and waiting. Captain Augusto Vaz Orrego was a man shaped by such places. Tall, careful, with the steady hands of someone who liked to keep a record of what he saw. His small camera hung from his neck like a badge. He believed in discipline, but he also believed in bearing witness. Down here, where the nights lasted months and the storms erased your footprints in minutes, a camera was proof that you had existed. The day it began, the air was heavy with a kind of stillness that felt like the pause before a held breath. The clouds were low, the sun just a pale smear behind them, and the snow moved in loose curtains across the bay. The sea was restless, slabs of ice grinding together with slow, tired groans. It was a young radio operator who noticed it first. He had stepped outside for a smoke, leaning against a snow-battered railing, trying to coax warmth into his fingers. His cigarette tip glowed a dull orange in the wind, and then he froze. Above the water, not far from the edge of the cliffs, something shone. He thought at first it was a star, but there were no stars in that part of the sky, not in that light, not at that hour. It was too low, too bright, too steady. "Capitan," he called, his voice thin against the wind. Footsteps crunched. Men emerged, their parkas stiff, their goggles catching the faint glow. One by one they saw it, a disk of pale gold, no bigger than a coin if you held it at arm's length, hovering with a calm that felt almost deliberate. It was not part of the weather. It was not part of the sky. Orrego came quickly. His boots hit the snow with the weight of a man already rehearsing what he would have to write. He took the binoculars, adjusted the focus with gloves that squeaked against the cold metal. For a long while he said nothing. The men murmured, each one with his own theory ready on his tongue, but none spoken loudly. Then Orrego raised his camera. The click of the shutter felt loud against the ice. He wound the film with careful fingers, took another and another, the lens fogging each time he breathed too close. The disc did not move at first. It hung there, golden at the edges, soft in the middle, as though lit from a place behind the clouds. Minutes passed. The wind stirred, carrying flakes of ice that rattled against their coats. A dog barked somewhere near the kennels, then fell silent again. The disc shifted, slowly, not with the drift of a balloon or the sway of a flare, but with purpose. It slid sideways, stopped, and then rose slightly. You might have expected noise, a hum, a crackle. There was none, only the whisper of snow against rock, the faint creak of the base, as if it, too, were trying to listen. Some men whispered about reflections, the way ice can play tricks with the light. Others said nothing at all. The captain lowered his camera and watched with the kind of look that makes other men stand straighter. He was not frightened, not exactly, but something in him understood that they were seeing more than just weather. And then, without warning, it darted. A movement too clean, too sharp. It crossed the bay in a heartbeat, stopped, flickered, and was gone. No trail, no smoke, no flash. The snow fell heavier. The men stamped their feet, their excitement fading into the usual cold that seeps into your bones out here. Someone laughed, though no one knew why. Someone else swore he had felt the hair on his neck rise just before it vanished. Inside, the base smelled of damp wool and kerosene. The photographs were passed hand to hand, still warm from the captain's coat, blurry, too bright in the middle. One frame showed only the pale hint of the disk against a grey sky. Another had nothing but the shimmer of light, as though the thing had chosen how much it wished to be seen. The report went north. The photographs went with it. Weeks later, only the report returned. Officially, the sky had been quiet. Officially, there was nothing to explain. But the men remembered. They remembered how the air had seemed to pause, how the light had moved, like it knew they were watching, how Captain Arago had stayed outside long after the others had gone in, his hands deep in his pockets, staring at the place where the sky met the sea. Years later, some would call it a trick of the atmosphere. Others would say it was an early drone, a foreign test. But a few, those who had been there, those who had felt that sudden hush, carried a different story. They said the ice remembers things we forget. They said the sky above Antarctica is not always empty. And somewhere, perhaps in a locked cabinet in a distant office, the missing photographs might still be waiting to be found, waiting to remind us that not every light in the polar night belongs to us. Chapter 3. Operation Highjump UFO Claims, 1947. You can feel the weight of a continent before you even see it. The air grows harder. The waves lose their rhythm. The horizon turns pale in a way that makes you blink twice, wondering if your eyes are playing tricks. That was what the men aboard the fleet felt as they approached Antarctica during Operation Highjump, the great expedition of 1947. It was meant to be a show of strength, a test of endurance, a wide sweep of the frozen south by ships, planes, and men who thought they understood what cold could do. They came with steel and engines, their decks stacked with crates, their radios crackling with orders. There were destroyers, tankers, icebreakers, and carriers. There were men who had crossed oceans in war and thought this would be just another mission, though quieter, though colder. But Antarctica is never just cold. It has moods. It has secrets. From the moment the fleet pushed deeper, the weather played tricks. Clear skies fell into white veils in minutes. Instruments went dull without warning. Compasses quivered. And in that strange stillness between storm and calm, stories began to gather. It was the pilots who first spoke of them. Lights that danced at the edge of vision, gliding faster than any storm wind, changing direction like minnows in a stream. One reported a shining curve darting across the ice at a speed no man could follow. Another swore he saw a shadow cross his wing, though the sky was empty. At first, the officers called it glare, snowlight, ice haze, nothing more. But whispers do not fade easily in places where nights stretch too long. Men compared sketches, rough circles drawn on mess hall napkins. They traced movements with their fingers across maps, eyes narrowing as they realized the same patch of sky had been marked again and again. I remember the night the story broke wide among them. The icebreaker had stopped to cut a path, the sea a sheet of broken glass. The wind was low, the kind of night when even the huskies stopped barking. A pilot staggered in, his face still pale from the cockpit. He spoke of discs, several of them rising from the horizon like coins thrown in slow motion. They hovered, they tilted, and then they shot upward, out of sight, as though the very air had become a road. The Admiral, Richard Byrd, heard the reports. He was a man who carried maps like other men carried prayer books, a man who believed in order. But Antarctica has a way of making even the most ordered men pause. The logs grew careful. Some lines were written, others left blank. When asked later, the expedition spoke of weather, of supply runs, of men lost to frost and missteps. But in the quiet corners, away from the microphones, a few told more. One engineer said he watched a craft skim so low over the ice that it lifted a curtain of snow behind it. No sound, no exhaust, just a gleaming underside that caught the moonlight like a blade. A radio man remembered a moment when the dials on his set went dead for no reason, the air around him prickling. the hairs on his arms standing like pine needles. You might think such a fleet, with its guns and planes, would have chased them, but what do you chase when it moves faster than your fastest jet and vanishes before the radar even blinks? They watched. They waited. And then, as suddenly as the lights had come, they were gone. When the expedition ended, the reports were folded into thicker reports, stamped, filed, and left to gather dust in rooms warmer than the men had been. Officially, Operation Highjump was a success. Officially, the lights were tricks of polar glare, mirages of the endless day. But those who had stood on the deck, their breath freezing in the dark, their hands gripping railings that shuddered under their weight, remembered. They remembered how the sky seemed too aware of them, how the horizon sometimes held its breath. And when they sailed north, leaving the ice behind, some looked back, not out of pride, not out of longing, but out of a quiet, gnawing thought that perhaps they had been seen. Chapter 4, USS Brownson Encounter, 1950s. The Weddell Sea is a world unto itself. It does not move like other oceans. The water is heavy, dark, and slow, pressing against the hull of the USS Brownson as if it were a living thing. Ice floes drift lazily, some barely noticeable, others massive, dark ridges of frozen stone slicing the surface. The sky above is a pale, frozen dome, and the wind is constant, carrying salt and ice, and the faint metallic tang of cold that makes your lungs ache with each breath. The crew of the Brownson had sailed here before. They knew the monotony of the polar night, the subtle creaks of the hull that sound like whispers, the way shadows gather along the deck in shapes that make you blink twice. But no one could prepare them for what came that evening. It began with lights, not the kind you expect, navigational lights, distant stars, reflections of ice. These were different. They hovered above the horizon, golden and green, shifting and glimmering with a precision no human craft could achieve. One officer noticed them first, his binoculars pressed to his eyes, his breath fogging the lenses. "They're moving," he whispered, not loudly, not with certainty. The wind carried the words away before anyone could respond. Another sailor joined him, squinting. The lights rose and fell, darted side to side, yet made no sound. The engines of the Brownson, the only noise, seemed dull in comparison, almost embarrassed by their ordinary presence. Captain Harrison, a man who had seen more battles than he cared to count, came on deck. He wore the long coat of the cold and a calm that came from years of command. His eyes scanned the lights. He did not shout, though he clenched his jaw. He knew the ocean. He knew the sky. And yet, he did not know this. The luminous crafts hovered, paused, then glided with sudden bursts of speed, their movement so impossible that the men felt a dissonance in their very bones. One moment the light was near, reflecting across the ice like a living sun, and the next, it had vanished, leaving only the frozen horizon. You could feel the uncertainty in the crew. Fingers drummed against the railing, boots shifted on the deck, radios crackled faintly but carried no orders. No one dared suggest pursuit what could be chased, and by what. The objects were everywhere and nowhere at once. For hours, the lights continued their silent performance. The sailors tried to record what they saw, snapping photographs that came out as pale blurs or glowing streaks. Instruments acted strangely. Compasses wavered. Radar, designed to see anything, caught nothing. There was no interference, no echoes, no trace of any conventional machinery. One young seaman swore he saw the outline of a craft beneath the light, smooth, elongated, like a shadow stretched in the glow. Another reported feeling a faint hum in the air, though no engine or power source was visible. Captain Harrison listened quietly to these accounts, nodding, his face tense. He made notes, but the only thing certain was that the ordinary rules of navigation and physics seemed not to apply here. By nightfall, the crew was both exhilarated and unnerved. They moved about silently, as if speaking might shatter the fragile barrier between the known and the impossible. Somewhere below deck, someone laughed nervously, and the sound echoed oddly through the corridors. mingling with the soft groan of the hull against the ice. The lights lingered until dawn, retreating into the pale horizon, leaving behind a frozen sea, a crew full of questions, and an officer who would later describe the encounter as unlike anything he had ever witnessed in 40 years at sea. Years later, when historians pieced together sightings in the region, the Brownson encounter remained unique. Not a single radar trace, not a single report confirmed. Only testimonies of the men who saw something that defied both explanation and the imagination, hovering, glimmering, silent, and utterly untraceable. Standing on the deck, you could imagine the cold biting your skin, the wind tugging at your coat, and your eyes fixed on the empty horizon, knowing that something had been there, something not of this world. And when you blinked, it was gone, leaving only the hum of the sea and the persistent feeling that Antarctica hides more than ice and snow. Chapter 5. Cigar-Shaped Objects over Robertson Island, 1956. Antarctica, in midwinter, has a way of making time feel meaningless. At Robertson Island, the ice stretches endlessly in every direction, a pale desert that reflects even the faintest glimmers of sunlight, as if the whole world were a mirror. It was here that 4 Chilean scientists, bundled in thick coats and scarves, ventured out from their base. They were equipped with instruments, notebooks, and a careful sense of skepticism, trained to measure the natural world, not to witness the impossible. The day began like any other. The wind cut sharp through their gloves, and snow drifted in thin, curling sheets across the ice. Their breath rose in steady clouds. The instruments hummed, recording the cold, the wind speed, the faint tremors in the ice. Each scientist had a role. One watched the horizon, another checked readings from a portable spectrometer, another maintained the radio, and the fourth sketched the formations of nearby icebergs, noting their shape and drift. Then it began. A shadow appeared on the horizon, long, narrow, and impossibly still against the pale sky. It was not moving like a cloud or an iceberg. It hovered. They could see the reflection of sunlight glinting along its metallic surface, catching like gold threads against steel. "Is that?" one scientist whispered, but the words faltered on the wind. They moved closer, boots crunching against ice, instruments held carefully in gloved hands. Radiation spikes registered on their meters almost immediately. The readings were irregular, fluctuating with the movement of the object, but they did not correspond to any known source. The cigar-shaped object stretched vertically into the sky, its surface smooth, without markings, without wings or engines. It seemed to pulse slightly, a subtle shimmer that hinted at energy flowing beneath its skin. Minutes passed. Hours could have passed. The cold made it hard to measure time, and the men were too focused on observing to notice it slipping by. Then another appeared, twin shadows, like sentinels, hovering silently a few hundred meters away. Their presence was overwhelming. The air around them felt different, though they could not say why. A subtle hum, almost imperceptible, ran through the ice beneath their feet. They tried to communicate via radio. No signal would go through. Static filled the channels, not the usual white noise of equipment, but a heavy, pressing interference that seemed to come from the objects themselves. The men watched in silence, notebooks full of sketches and numbers that seemed inadequate. One carefully adjusted his spectrometer. The readings jumped and dipped, far beyond what their instruments were designed to handle. Another measured the magnetic field, only to find fluctuations that made compasses spin wildly. Hours later, when the objects finally began to rise slowly and drift away over the ice, the scientists were left frozen not from cold, but from the realization that what they had seen was entirely outside human experience. They had documented it. They had proof. And yet, no one would see it but them. Back at the base, the discussion was tense. Could it be a secret aircraft? They considered every known possibility. Could it be natural phenomena? Atmospheric distortion? Meteors caught in the wind? None of these explanations could account for the size, the hovering, the radiation readings, or the deliberate movement of the objects. The day ended with the sun low on the horizon, casting long, pale shadows across the ice. The scientists huddled together, boots wet from melting snow, hands numb, hearts racing. The objects had disappeared over the horizon, but their presence lingered. Every instrument, every meter, every line of their notebooks seemed to whisper a single truth. They had witnessed something entirely unknown, and yet they could not share it, not fully. Because how do you explain something that breaks all rules? How do you report to your superiors that two massive metallic cigar-shaped objects hovered silently, manipulating the very air and energy around them, while remaining entirely undetectable, except to those brave enough to stare? The Weddell Sea reflected the pink glow of sunset, icebergs casting elongated shadows like frozen fingers across the horizon. The men packed up, reluctant to leave, reluctant to break the spell. That night, in their bunks, the hum of the station felt different. The wind outside sounded sharper. The ice seemed to breathe. They could not sleep easily, knowing that somewhere beyond the horizon, two impossible objects had moved with precision and silence that mocked every law of physics they understood. Years later, the report remained buried in military archives, and the instruments recorded readings that scientists today would struggle to interpret. But for those four Chilean observers, the memory was etched into the mind. The gleaming cigar-shaped shadows hovering over Robertson Island, untraceable, silent, and alive with something they could not name. And as they left the ice the following week, the horizon seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting for their return. Chapter 6. McMurdo Base Humanoid Sighting, 1958. The wind never stops in Antarctica. Even in the austral summer, the air carries a chill that sinks into every layer of clothing, every glove, every exposed patch of skin. At McMurdo Base, the men were accustomed to this cold, to the constant hiss of ice against metal, to the way shadows stretch long and distorted across the endless white. They had routines, schedules, and instruments designed to record every detail of their environment, but nothing prepared them for what would appear that day. The officer who would later tell the story had been on the ice since the early morning, checking radio equipment, surveying the horizon, and noting every change in wind and cloud. His boots crunched rhythmically against the frozen surface, a sound he could almost lose himself in. Each step was calculated, careful. The horizon seemed far away, an endless sheet of grey-white, broken only by distant ridges of ice and occasional jagged peaks. He paused to adjust the lenses on his camera, fogging slightly in the frigid air. He had been trained to record the ordinary, the scientific, the measurable. But as he raised the camera and glanced toward the horizon, something made him stop. There, just at the edge, where ice met sky, a glint caught his eye. At first he thought it was sunlight reflecting off ice, but it did not move with the clouds or shift with the angle of the sun. It hovered, smooth, precise, unnatural. His heart began to beat faster, though his voice remained silent. The wind seemed to drop for a moment, leaving a hollow stillness, the kind of silence that stretches tight across the landscape. Slowly, he moved closer, careful not to make too much noise. Each step left a distinct print in the snow, a record of his path, a reminder that he was small in a place that was vast and ancient. As he approached, the shape resolved itself into a craft unlike any plane, helicopter, or experimental vehicle he had ever seen. It rested lightly on the ice, almost floating, with no sound of engines or rotors, no exhaust, no heat detectable by his instruments. And then he saw the figure, tall, humanoid in shape, though proportioned differently than a human. Its movements were fluid, deliberate, and precise. Its body shimmered slightly in the pale sunlight, like a reflective suit, or perhaps skin imbued with something beyond human understanding. The officer froze, caught between fear and fascination. Every instinct screamed to call for help, to retreat, yet he remained rooted to the ice, unwilling to tear his gaze away. He raised his camera slowly, snapping a photograph. The flash was tiny, almost imperceptible, but it seemed to ripple across the figure, as though it could sense even that small disturbance. He clicked again, then another. Each frame recorded a blur of light and shape, but unmistakable evidence of something not of the world he knew. The humanoid bent slightly, seemingly interacting with the craft. Its movements were deliberate, intentional, yet alien. It appeared to examine the surrounding ice with an awareness that was unsettling, aware not only of the environment but of the man watching it. The officer's breath came in slow clouds, each one freezing almost instantly, as if the very air sought to keep the moment suspended in time. He stepped back slightly, aware of the thin line between curiosity and danger. He whispered into the radio to see if anyone else had noticed anything. There was only static, no reply. It was as if the figure had silenced the air around it, creating a pocket of absolute focus. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Every movement, every subtle shift of the figure's head, every tilt of its craft, seemed loaded with intent. The officer scribbled notes in his pocket-sized journal, words inadequate to capture the strangeness of what he was seeing. The wind hummed against the ice, a faint background sound, but the silence of the craft and the figure pressed against him more heavily than any storm could. Suddenly, the figure straightened. Its attention seemed to fixate on him, and for a heartbeat, the officer felt a connection that was not human, not communicative in any sense he understood, but profoundly aware. Then, without warning, the craft began to rise. Slowly at first, almost hesitantly, then with a speed that defied gravity and expectation. The humanoid remained perfectly balanced, its body poised as though guiding the craft with thought alone. The officer stumbled backward, catching himself against a frozen ridge. He tried to follow with the camera, snapping again and again, but the flash was swallowed by the cold, the light of the pale sun, and the blinding whiteness of the ice. And then they were gone. Not with a roar, not with any conventional movement, simply vanished, leaving nothing behind but the snow underfoot, the wind returning with its mournful cry, and a horizon that looked impossibly empty. He returned to the base slowly, each step weighted by disbelief and awe. His colleagues noticed the pallor of his face, the trembling of his hands. They pressed him for answers, but he could offer only a careful recounting, leaving out the sensations that defied description, the hum that seemed to vibrate in his chest, the feeling of being watched in a way that was not threatening but utterly other. At night, lying in his bunk, he stared at the walls and ceiling of the station, replaying the moment over and over. The photographs were dim and blurry, yet each frame carried the impossible proof. He thought of the craft, of the figure, and of the way the Antarctic horizon had swallowed them so completely. Sleep was difficult. Dreams were haunted by light, reflection, and movement beyond his comprehension. Over the next few days, he returned to the ice, hoping for a sign, anything, but the snow and wind remained indifferent. Instruments recorded normal readings, skies appeared empty, and the ice stretched endlessly, unchanged. But he knew what he had seen. It was not a trick of light, not fatigue, not imagination. Something had touched McMurdo Base, something aware, deliberate, and beyond human understanding. Years later, when recounting the encounter in private notes, he emphasized that the true impression was not the figure itself, but the way it existed in the landscape, perfectly balanced, aware, and untouchable. He never suggested that anyone could confront or replicate the sighting. It was a reminder that Antarctica, despite its measured routines and scientific discipline, still held mysteries that defied reason, and that sometimes the most profound encounters happen in silence, in isolation, and on the edge of human perception. Chapter 7. Golden Disk over Hallett Station, 1962. Hallett Station is perched on a narrow strip of rock between the ice and the sea, a place where wind and snow meet stone in constant battle. Even in the austral summer, the cold cuts through the thickest clothing, and the air tastes metallic with salt and ice. The scientists stationed there had grown accustomed to long hours of observation, checking instruments, mapping ice movements, and recording temperatures. Yet no training, no routine, and no preparation could have readied them for what appeared one clear afternoon. The day began deceptively ordinary. A thin layer of clouds spread across the sky, allowing pale sunlight to filter through, reflecting off snow and ice with a soft glow. The team went about their usual duties, calibrating instruments, inspecting the coastline, and noting the positions of icebergs drifting lazily in the shallow waters. Then one of the younger scientists noticed a glimmer above the horizon. At first, he thought it was the reflection of the sun off ice or a distant ship, but it did not move like either. It hovered, steady, golden, and radiant. He called the others over, pointing with a gloved hand. Their binoculars revealed a circular object, gleaming with a light that seemed too perfect to be natural. The edges of the disk glinted like molten metal, while the center remained smooth, luminous, almost as if lit from within. It hung there silently, suspended in the cold air, refusing to drift with the wind. The scientists were torn between disbelief and fascination. One suggested it could be a planet, a reflection, or a trick of the light. Another shook his head, noting that planets do not hover so low and so large, nor do they appear suddenly in mid-sky. Instruments were quickly brought out. Spectrometers, cameras, and telescopes were focused on the disk. The readings were baffling light wavelengths that seemed unfamiliar, heat signatures that fluctuated in ways that made no sense, and a complete absence of sound or motion detectable by conventional means. For over an hour, they watched. The disk remained steady, as though observing them in return. It rotated slightly, just enough to reflect the sunlight in different directions, creating an ethereal shimmer across the ice. The shadow it cast was faint, but sharp, stretching over snow and rock. One of the scientists, usually skeptical of everything, whispered that it looked alive, aware. Attempts to communicate or signal the disk were met with nothing. Radio calls remained unanswered, and the wind seemed to carry their words away, leaving only the soft hum of distant ice cracking. The golden disk shifted slightly, then returned to its original position, as if moving with intent rather than being carried by the elements. The crew debated what to do. Photograph it, follow it, ignore it. Each option felt equally impossible and necessary. Cameras clicked, instruments hummed, and notes were scribbled rapidly. The disk's light reflected across their faces, warming them in the frigid air despite the cold. Its presence was mesmerizing, hypnotic even, holding their attention in a way that seemed unnatural. Hours passed. The disk rotated, shimmered, and reflected the sun in new patterns. Clouds drifted past it without disturbing its position. Icebergs moved beneath it, casting shadows that seemed to bow to its quiet dominance. And still, no sound, no exhaust, no movement other than its own deliberate adjustments. As evening approached, the scientists observed one final, startling motion. The disk accelerated, slowly at first, then with a speed that defied comprehension. It moved horizontally, tracing a perfect arc over the ice and rocks, then vanished beyond the horizon with a glow that lingered in the sky for a fleeting moment, like the last memory of sunlight on snow. Back at the base, the debate raged. Some suggested optical illusions, atmospheric phenomena, or misidentified celestial bodies. Others quietly accepted what they had seen, the photographs and instrument readings confirming their reality. Skeptics dismissed it publicly, attributing it to mistakes or exaggeration. Yet in the private diaries and logs, the record was clear. A golden disk, hovering with intent, luminous beyond understanding, had appeared over Hallett station. At night, the air in the station felt charged. Shadows seemed longer, noises quieter, and every flicker of light reflected from the ice carried a new tension. The disk had left no trace beyond memory, photographs, and data, yet the sense of being observed remained. Scientists spoke in hushed tones, cautious of dismissing what could not be explained, and wary of overstating what might have been an extraordinary coincidence. And though time passed, and the disk faded from daily consciousness, the encounter lingered. Those who had seen it would forever carry the memory of a moment when the Antarctic sky held a perfect golden shape, alive in a way that challenged the boundaries of reality, hovering between understanding and wonder, just beyond human comprehension. Chapter 8: UFOs After Atomic Test, 1962. The air over Antarctica has a strange quality during nuclear tests. It hums with tension, carries a sharp metallic edge, and seems almost alive with the energy released by human experiments. That day, the explorers were stationed at a safe distance from the detonation site, observing the sky, recording readings, and monitoring the ice and wind. They had prepared for shock waves, radiation spikes, and atmospheric disturbances. What they were not prepared for was what appeared in the sky afterward. It began as a quiet hum, not the expected low rumble of machinery or the soft whoosh of ice shifting, but something different, a vibration in the air that seemed to resonate deep within their chests. The explorers glanced at one another, eyebrows raised, hands gripping instruments, as the hum intensified. And then they saw it, a massive object, unlike any aircraft or balloon they had ever seen, emerged over the horizon. It moved toward the test zone with intent. Its size was enormous, dwarfing the surrounding ice ridges. Its shape was not entirely discernible, but it glimmered with a metallic sheen, reflecting the pale sunlight and creating a flickering halo across the snow. The explorers scrambled to bring their instruments to bear. Spectrometers, Geiger counters, cameras, and binoculars all recorded anomalies. Radiation levels spiked briefly, then normalized, but the object's presence seemed to influence the environment in ways that defied explanation. It did not move with conventional speed or aerodynamics. It glided, floated, and then accelerated with sudden bursts, covering impossible distances in moments. One of the scientists attempted to communicate via radio. The static that greeted them was thick and persistent, interfering with the usual channels. It was almost as if the object absorbed sound, or at least the frequencies used for communication, creating a vacuum of normalcy around it. The object's approach was deliberate. It seemed to circle the detonation site, observing, lingering, and reacting to the energy released. Every flash from the test drew it closer, yet it maintained perfect distance, never coming too near, never retreating entirely. The explorers felt a mix of awe and fear. The cold wind that swept across the ice seemed sharper, carrying with it the weight of something intelligent, deliberate, and beyond comprehension. For hours, they observed, the object rotated slightly, reflecting sunlight like a mirror, its surface occasionally shimmering with unidentifiable energy. The explorers tried to track it with instruments, but nothing they measured aligned with known physics. Instruments spun, dials fluctuated wildly, and cameras captured blurred, almost living light patterns that could not be interpreted. The psychological tension grew. Some explorers whispered to one another, sharing theories in hushed voices. Could it be a secret human craft? Impossible. Could it be atmospheric reflection or auroras? No explanation fit. They were forced to accept the simple truth. Something had appeared in the Antarctic sky, attracted to the nuclear test, observing with awareness and intent. As evening approached, the object finally moved away, slowly at first, then with bursts of speed that left no trace. It vanished beyond the horizon. The explorers were left in silence, instruments returning to normal readings, the hum fading from the air. The ice and snow were undisturbed, but the memory of what they had seen remained vivid. Back at base, discussion was intense. Officers and scientists debated explanations. Some suggested misidentified weather balloons or optical illusions caused by light reflecting off snow and ice. Others accepted that the object was something entirely beyond human knowledge. Logs were carefully written, photographs stored, and measurements recorded, but much of the detail would remain confidential for decades. That night, the base felt different. Shadows stretched longer, the wind seemed to whisper, and the faint glow of the setting sun over the ice carried a tension that had not been there before. Explorers reported dreams filled with light, motion, and impossible flight patterns. Conversations turned toward the object, its intelligence, and the unnerving way it had monitored the human experiment without interference. Days later, the ice remained unchanged, the sky clear and silent, but the sense of being observed lingered. The explorers continued their work, but always with the memory of the golden, metallic craft circling the detonation site, a presence that defied understanding and reminded them that Antarctica still held secrets that humans were only beginning to glimpse. Years later, when reports surfaced, they confirmed that sightings after atomic tests in Antarctica were not isolated incidents. The object had left no physical trace, yet its observation challenged the understanding of science and physics. Those who witnessed it never forgot the deliberate, silent presence of something that watched humanity's experiments as if it were both curious and protective, existing on a scale beyond comprehension. Chapter 9. The C-130 Escort Incident, 1964. Flying over the frozen expanse of Antarctica in a C-130 transport is like moving through another world. Below, ice stretches endlessly, a pale, fractured sea of white and blue. The sun hangs low, a soft glow on the horizon that never fully rises, never fully sets. The wind is distant but ever present, and the cold radiates upward from the ice, seeping into every inch of the aircraft despite the heaters and insulation. The crew on board was experienced in long, isolated flights. They had navigated through storms, avoided hidden ridges of ice, and monitored instruments that tracked altitude, temperature, and mechanical performance. But nothing had prepared them for the events that unfolded on that flight. It began subtly. Systems flickered. Instruments momentarily lost power. Lights in the cockpit dimmed and brightened in irregular pulses. The crew exchanged concerned glances, tapping panels and checking fuses, but the equipment returned to normal almost immediately. They shrugged it off, attributing it to the cold and altitude until the lights appeared. At first, they were small points on the horizon, glowing faintly against the pale sky. Then, one by one, they grew in size and intensity, moving with deliberate precision alongside the aircraft. 9 of them, perfectly spaced, maintaining exact formation as if choreographed. They glowed with a color that defied simple description, radiant, metallic, shifting slightly in hue as the sun reflected off them. The crew tried to take readings. Instruments went haywire. Radar, designed to detect even small objects, registered nothing. Magnetic compasses spun wildly, then froze. Cameras captured streaks of light, shapes that seemed to move faster than any plane or missile known. And still, there was no sound, no engines, no hum, no interference other than the strange readings. The pilot, a seasoned officer with thousands of flight hours, gripped the controls tightly. "Do you see that?" he asked, voice steady but tense. It's following us," one navigator replied, eyes wide as he adjusted binoculars. The objects mirrored every adjustment of the aircraft. When the pilot ascended slightly, they rose in perfect unison. When the plane banked to the left, they followed precisely. It was as if they anticipated every move, a deliberate escort that defied human logic. For hours, the crew endured the silent vigil. They tried to communicate with the objects using radio, flares, and light signals, but there was no response beyond their movements. The UFOs seemed aware, deliberate, yet utterly detached. The air inside the C-130 felt charged, almost vibrating, though the crew could not explain why. Suddenly, the engines that had flickered earlier regained steady power. Lights stabilized. Instruments returned to normal. The UFOs hovered momentarily, then accelerated in perfect formation, disappearing over the horizon with a speed that left no trace. The crew sat in stunned silence. The event was beyond explanation. Flight logs were filled with detailed accounts, photographs, and instrument readings. Officers debated what had occurred. Some suggested secret experimental craft, perhaps from advanced military projects. Others shook their heads, unable to reconcile the precision, the glow, and the absence of noise with any human-made technology. The psychological impact lingered long after the flight ended. Crew members reported restless sleep, dreams filled with glowing shapes and impossible flight paths, and a lingering sense that they had been watched or escorted by something intelligent. Conversations were careful, measured. Some refused to speak at all, fearful of ridicule or misunderstanding. Years later, declassified reports confirmed the event, but offered no explanation. The 9 glowing objects remained unidentified, their movements deliberate, intelligent, and entirely untraceable. The C-130 crew had encountered something that could not be catalogued, analyzed, or dismissed, a silent escort that demonstrated awareness, precision, and technology far beyond human understanding. Standing in the cockpit afterward, watching the horizon where the objects had vanished, the pilot noted the silence of Antarctica. The ice, the sky, the endless horizon all seemed ordinary again, but he knew it was not. Something extraordinary had occurred above the frozen continent, and the memory of those 9 glowing shapes lingered, a reminder that Antarctica was more than ice and wind. It was a place where the impossible could touch the ordinary, and where the skies could hold secrets humanity was only beginning to glimpse. Chapter 10. Deception Island UFO Wave, 1965. Deception Island is a place of extremes, a volcanic caldera surrounded by jagged cliffs. Its waters are deceptively calm, reflecting the pale sky above, yet hiding turbulent currents beneath. Snow and ice cling to the rocky slopes, and wind howls through narrow channels, carrying flakes of ice that sting exposed skin. It is isolated, inhospitable, and beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, the perfect stage for events that defy explanation. That day, teams of scientists from Argentina, Chile, and Britain had gathered at different points around the island. They were conducting routine observations, mapping the coastline, studying volcanic activity, and monitoring local wildlife. Instruments were set up to record temperature, radiation, and magnetic fluctuations, but none of them had ever prepared for what would happen. The first sighting came from a Chilean scientist stationed near the southern cliffs. A faint glimmer appeared above the horizon, moving unnaturally fast, a metallic disk that hovered for only a moment before vanishing. At first, he assumed it was a reflection or a weather balloon, but the readings from his instruments told another story. Radiation spiked briefly, magnetic fields fluctuated, and the air seemed to carry a faint hum that was impossible to locate. Minutes later, the phenomenon escalated. Dozens of disks appeared, moving in precise formations across the sky. They darted, hovered, and rotated with a speed and agility that no aircraft could achieve. Observers from all 3 national teams quickly noticed the pattern. The objects were not random. They moved deliberately, coordinated as if sharing a single consciousness. Binoculars, cameras, and telescopes were trained on the disks. Observers scribbled notes frantically. The objects reflected sunlight like polished metal, and their sheer speed created optical distortions that made them shimmer and blur. Some seemed to split into smaller units, only to merge again in mid-air. Shadows on the snow shifted unnaturally as the disks passed overhead, creating the illusion of movement on the ice below. Instruments recorded strange anomalies. Geiger counters flickered, recording brief spikes. Magnetic compasses spun without pattern. Temperature readings jumped momentarily, then normalized, leaving the scientists baffled. Radios buzzed with static that seemed to coincide with the object's movements, interfering with communication between teams. The British team observed from a higher ridge, noting that the disks seemed aware of their instruments, adjusting positions as if avoiding direct observation or studying the equipment. The Chilean team below reported similar behavior. Even the Argentine scientists, stationed on the eastern cliffs, witnessed the objects moving with intelligence, following paths that suggested careful observation rather than random flight. Time became difficult to measure. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the wave of disks moved across the sky. The Antarctic wind cut sharply across faces, and snow stung exposed eyes, yet no one dared look away. The sheer improbability of what they were seeing coordinated, high-speed, metallic objects, defying physics pressed on their minds with an almost paralyzing weight. Suddenly, as quickly as they had appeared, the disks vanished. There was no crash, no sound, no trace beyond a faint shimmer on the horizon and the rapidly stabilizing readings on instruments. The observers were left in stunned silence. They compared notes, photographs, and sketches, struggling to find rational explanations. None existed. Officially, the incident was recorded, yet public acknowledgement was limited. Argentina's Navy confirmed the sightings, lending credibility, but skepticism remained high. Within the scientific teams, private discussions continued for days. Some suggested experimental aircraft, secret military projects, or atmospheric phenomena. Others quietly accepted that what they had witnessed was beyond human explanation, a glimpse of something intelligent and technologically advanced that had visited the remote Antarctic skies. In the days following, the environment felt different. Observers reported a heightened awareness, shadows that seemed longer, winds that seemed sharper, and a persistent sense of being watched. The memory of the discs lingered, etched into notebooks, instruments, and minds alike. Even years later, photographs and readings would remain a testament to the event, a wave of high-speed, coordinated discs, moving with intelligence, visible only to those present at Deception Island that fateful day. The Antarctic sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a soft glow across ice and rock. The winds continued to whistle through the caldera, carrying flakes of snow like whispered secrets. And though the discs had vanished, their presence left an indelible mark on those who had witnessed them, a reminder that Antarctica, despite its harsh and measured world, still harbored mysteries far beyond human understanding, waiting silently in the vast sky above. Chapter 11. Mount Gaudry, Buzzing Cloud, 1966. Mount Gaudry rises sharply from the frozen Antarctic plateau, its jagged peaks scraping against a pale sky. Ice and snow cling to every ridge, and the wind sweeps relentlessly across the slopes, carrying sharp flakes that sting exposed skin and bite through heavy clothing. The British survey team had been stationed there for days, mapping the mountains, taking geological samples, and recording weather conditions. The cold was constant, the isolation absolute, and the landscape unforgiving. That afternoon, the surveyors noticed a strange formation in the sky above the mountain. At first, it appeared to be a cloud, but it hovered unusually, maintaining a perfect shape despite the swirling winds. The edges pulsed faintly with light, and a subtle vibration, almost like a hum, seemed to emanate from it. One surveyor adjusted his binoculars. The cloud shimmered with a metallic gleam, expanding and contracting rhythmically as if breathing. Curiosity and unease spread quickly through the team. They had seen strange weather phenomena before, but nothing behaved like this. The cloud's motion was deliberate. It rotated slowly, then tilted, casting irregular shadows across the snow below. The air around it seemed charged, carrying a static energy that made hair stand on end, and instruments behaved strangely. Thermometers fluctuated wildly, magnetic compasses spun without reason, and radios emitted a low, static hum that mirrored the vibration of the hovering cloud. The first surveyor stepped closer, notebook in hand, recording every detail. "Look at that snow column," he whispered, pointing to a swirling funnel forming directly beneath the cloud. Beams of faint light extended downward, touching the ice and snow. The column rotated slowly, carrying tiny particles of snow into its center, suspended as if the wind itself obeyed some unseen force. Others joined him, eyes wide. The cloud expanded slightly, then contracted, adjusting its position over the mountain with unnerving precision. It seemed aware of the observers, responding to movement on the ground. Cameras clicked repeatedly, but the metallic shimmer distorted images, leaving only vague, haunting traces of the phenomenon. Time became difficult to measure. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The cloud pulsed with energy, the snow column spun, and the British team remained frozen between fear and fascination. One surveyor attempted to communicate via radio with the base. Static. Another tried to throw a small object into the column, only to watch it levitate briefly before dropping back to the ice. The cold was relentless, but the team barely noticed. The energy of the hovering cloud and the whirling snow column demanded attention. Every sense was heightened: the sharp smell of snow and ice, the biting wind on exposed skin, the faint vibrations in the ground, and the strange play of light reflecting off the metallic shimmer. The observers could feel something intelligent in the behavior of the cloud, as though it were studying them as much as they were studying it. Suddenly, the cloud emitted a brighter pulse of light, and the snow column expanded, spinning faster. Small fragments of ice glowed briefly as they were caught in its motion, creating the illusion of sparks falling from the sky. The surveyors exchanged glances, knowing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Instruments continued to behave unpredictably, recording readings that defied explanation. Then, almost imperceptibly, the cloud began to rise. It lifted slowly, the snow column dissipating as it moved higher into the sky. The vibration faded, the air grew quiet, and the shadows stretched back to normal. Within moments, the hovering cloud was gone, leaving only pale sunlight, ice, and the sound of wind over the mountain. The surveyors stood in stunned silence. For hours afterward, they debated what they had seen. Could it have been an optical illusion, a rare meteorological phenomenon, or a trick of sunlight on snow and ice? Instruments and photographs seemed to confirm reality, yet the events defied conventional explanation. Every measurement, every observation pointed to something extraordinary: a hovering, intelligent presence, manipulating light, air, and snow with precision. Over the next few days, the team continued their work, scanning the skies and instruments for a repeat sighting. Nothing appeared. Yet the memory of the buzzing cloud, the whirling snow column, and the impossible control it exhibited over the environment remained vivid. Some surveyors later reported recurring dreams of the event: the rotating snow column, the metallic shimmer, and a faint hum that seemed to resonate in the chest. Years later, the Mount Gaudry incident became part of private reports and journals, discussed quietly among explorers and scientists. Skeptics offered explanations, but those present knew better. Antarctica, with its extreme conditions and isolation, had revealed something beyond ordinary understanding, a phenomenon that combined intelligence, energy, and environment into a singular, inexplicable event, leaving an indelible mark on the minds of all who witnessed it. Chapter 12: Modern Antarctic UFO Reports. Antarctica has changed since the early days of exploration, but it remains a place where the ordinary and extraordinary collide. Modern technology allows humans to monitor the ice and skies with satellites, high-resolution cameras, thermal imaging, and aircraft radar. Yet even with these tools, the continent continues to hide secrets that defy explanation. In the early 2000s, satellite imagery captured anomalies that drew attention. Heat signatures appeared in places where no geothermal activity should exist, patches of warmth beneath miles of ice that seemed to move and shift unnaturally. Scientists puzzled over them. Could it be volcanic vents, subglacial lakes, or measurement errors? The patterns suggested something else entirely: structures, movements, or energy sources, unexplainable by conventional science. Pilots flying over Antarctica reported strange objects performing maneuvers beyond the capabilities of any aircraft. Some saw bright discs hovering above ice shelves, moving silently across vast distances. Others noted elongated, cigar-shaped objects reflecting sunlight with perfect precision, vanishing in a blink. Reports indicated no sound, no exhaust, and no radar signatures, leaving crews both awed and uneasy. Research stations occasionally recorded lights or movements that appeared on thermal cameras. Some lights pulsed in sequences too regular to be natural. Others shifted beneath the ice, causing instruments to register activity without revealing a visible source. These anomalies were often fleeting, disappearing before teams could investigate fully, leaving only partial recordings, brief heat signatures, and a sense that something intelligent was present. The environment of Antarctica amplifies both perception and mystery. The wind carries sound strangely, the ice reflects light in ways that can deceive, and the isolation heightens every emotion. Scientists and explorers report a subtle feeling of being watched, a sense that their presence is acknowledged. Even experienced personnel, accustomed to long stays in extreme cold, find themselves uneasy, glancing over shoulders at the empty horizon. One pilot described a moment when a glowing object appeared alongside his aircraft. It mirrored every turn, maintaining perfect formation as if aware of the plane's instruments. Attempts to communicate or signal were fruitless. The craft accelerated and vanished, leaving only a faint shimmer in the sky and a crew shaken by the encounter. In 2020, satellite analysis revealed unusual formations under thick ice sheets, shapes that resembled landing areas, geometric patterns, or structures appeared briefly, then vanished, or were covered by shifting snow. Scientists debated the interpretations, but a growing body of evidence suggested that Antarctica might host phenomena or visitors beyond human knowledge. Military reports, some declassified, mention encounters during research flights or logistical missions. Aircraft systems malfunctioned inexplicably, instruments recorded impossible energy spikes, and visual sightings confirmed objects moving with intelligent intent. These reports are sparse but consistent enough to demand attention, challenging the notion that Antarctica is entirely understood. Modern explorers often work in teams equipped with the latest technology, yet they report the same sense of mystery that early Antarctic pioneers did. Lights, movements beneath ice, and unusual patterns appear without warning. Some believe these are signs of extraterrestrial activity, advanced hidden civilizations, or intelligent beings using physics humans have yet to discover. Others caution against jumping to conclusions, reminding that the continent's extreme environment can produce phenomena that defy easy explanation. Even in the present day, Antarctica continues to challenge understanding. Scientists, pilots, and satellite analysts have all recorded incidents that remain unexplained. Lights hover, heat signatures move, instruments fluctuate, and the ice conceals more than it reveals. The legacy of sightings from decades past, from Chilean Navy encounters to golden disks and buzzing clouds, continues in the 2000s, suggesting a continuity of unknown activity that stretches across generations. Those who witness these events often feel the same awe and tension described by explorers 50, 60, or even 70 years ago. The combination of extreme isolation, stark beauty, and inexplicable phenomena creates an atmosphere where imagination and reality intertwine. Every sighting reminds us that Antarctica is not just ice, snow, and rock. It is a living stage for mysteries that humans are only beginning to encounter. Despite decades of exploration, the continent keeps its secrets. The sky and ice conceal activity that challenges instruments, tests the limits of human perception, and sparks speculation about civilizations that may exist beyond comprehension. Satellite anomalies, heat signatures beneath the ice, and pilot sightings suggest something is there, something intelligent, deliberate, and invisible to ordinary observation. In the 2000s, the story of Antarctic UFOs continues, a thread connecting the earliest Chilean Navy reports, golden disks over research stations, and the buzzing clouds over Mount Gaudry to the modern age. It reminds us that even with technology, human curiosity, and decades of experience, Antarctica still holds secrets that defy understanding, waiting quietly beneath the ice, reflected in the pale sky and observed by those who dare to look closely. And as researchers continue their work, flying over ice shelves, monitoring thermal readings, and scanning the horizon with high-resolution cameras, one question remains: how much of Antarctica is truly known, and how much remains hidden, waiting for humanity to notice what has already been here for centuries, or perhaps millennia?